Hello, fellow photographers. Today we're going to be talking about neutral density filters, what they are, when you might need to use them, and more importantly, how to use them. Okay, so jumping right into it. What is a neutral density filter? Well, it's pretty much like putting a pair of sunglasses on. You're still seeing the same thing, it's just not quite as bright. So the same works for your camera. When you put a neutral density filter over your camera, you are now allowing yourself to be able to take slower shutter speeds in those bright environments. So what are the benefits of slowing down your shutter speed? Well, that's going to give you the ability to cause motion blur in your image. So let's say I was at a riverbank or on the seashore, which is actually where I intended to shoot this video had the weather been a little more cooperative. You can take a very long exposure image and get the water to kind of mist away and kind of give it a cool kind of effect while keeping your stationary objects frozen. So that's one of the more popular techniques in using a neutral density filter. You can also point it towards the clouds and get some nice cloud streaks and pretty much anything you can think of in landscape photography that might have motion that you might want to blur away. You can also use this at a semi-busy intersection or something. If you're trying to take a picture with no cars, you can take a longer exposure, and as long as those cars are moving through quickly enough, they'll blur right through and your camera won't even catch them, leaving only the scenery there in your photo. So what are the different types of neutral density filters? Well, if you had an ND2 filter, that will block only one stop of light. And when you're looking through it, it's probably going to be an almost clear grayish kind of color. And that's going to allow there to still be color to show through without changing the color of the image. Okay, so we mentioned that a neutral density filter will allow you to slow down your shutter speed so that you can take a longer exposure shot in bright sunlight. Now, these neutral density filters can get a bit expensive. So when I was in school, my teacher had told me about using a welder's glass instead of purchasing a neutral density filter. These work really well as a neutral density filter as well, with the exception of the neutral part. A neutral density filter, when it stops down the amount of light coming into your camera, it does so while preserving the color of what's going on around it. This welder's glass will not do that. You will get a very green tint to your image. Now, if you're shooting in RAW, it is possible to go through and kind of retrieve some of the colors, but it'll never look perfect again. This is really good for black and white photography. If you're wanting to shoot in color, you're going to need to have an actual neutral density filter. These come in different shapes and sizes. The kind that I'm going to show you today is going to be a square piece of glass. They have the screw-on kind, just like the regular filters. There's benefits to both kinds depending on what your use is. I like the square filters. My reasoning being is I've got one filter that will work with any lens I use because of how you set them up. I'll show you that in a second. So with ring filters, you can buy a large filter and then stop down adapters to fit your lens. And you can use that one filter for all your different lenses, assuming that that filter is larger or the same size as your largest lens. In a lot of ways, those kind of filters are going to be better if you're trekking through somewhere and you don't want as much to carry. But honestly, it's all a personal preference. They're all going to work the same. They're all going to have some slight limitations. These you might have a little more light leak coming through the front of the camera than you would with a ring filter. So it's just a preference thing as to what you buy, what you can get cheap enough, and what you're willing to do out in the field. So we're going to get started on how to set this up. So you're going to need a mounting system. So this here is a mounting system that's going to hold the filter. And then how do you get this onto your lens? That's going to come with these different screw-on mountings that fit just like a filter on your lens. So this filter is definitely going to take a little more time out of your day. So let's go ahead and set this up just to kind of show you how it works. This lens here, I believe, is a 62 millimeter filter thread. So let's put this on and see how it works. So when you're screwing on filters, so you don't mess up the internal rings, some people like to turn it the opposite direction a little bit before they turn it the proper way to screw it on. That is a preference thing. Just whatever you do, just make sure you don't go too hard to where you feel yourself ripping the threads. So we've got this one on, it's nice and tight. So then we can take our filter mount and we can put it on. So how this particular one works is you're going to slide it in at one side, you're going to push the lever and slide the other side in. So now we have our filter mounted. So at this point, once you have your mount on the front of your lens, this is where you compose your image. So what I like to do first is I like to compose the image how I want it to look, then check my settings, set my aperture however I want it. Then I will go through and bring my ISO to its lowest setting. This one's going to be 64 ISO. And then you use your camera's internal light meter and meter it for that current setting. Set your shutter speed to where it claims it needs to be. Focus, and then shut off your autofocus. Why are we shutting off the autofocus? Well, because once we take this filter out and we put it on the lens, we're not going to be able to autofocus anymore. Now, this particular filter here, this is an ND1000 or an ND 3.0 or something along those lines. And what this is 10 stops of light that is going to be blocking out. So let's turn this around again, just so you can kind of see it. And then we're just going to take this and we're going to slide it into our mount. Sometimes this filter thing is a little stubborn. It does that because it wants to hold it tight. So now we've got our filter on our lens. If we hadn't moved our camera, this would be set up how we had wanted it, and we didn't have to take the time screwing something on at this case because it's already screwed on, so you're less likely to bump your focus at this point. Okay, so right after I finished shooting this video, I remembered I forgot to tell y'all one thing. So when you're taking longer exposures, you want to be careful of unwanted light leaking in. So one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that your mount on the front is secured and does not let in any light. This can come with a few test shots and stuff just to see what kind of pictures you're getting from using your filter. Another thing is you're going to want to hide the viewfinder on the back of your camera because light can still bounce in to your camera, hit your sensor through the viewfinder. So some cameras will have this built in where you can just flick a switch and you can no longer see through the viewfinder. If your camera doesn't have that, what you can do is just kind of hide your viewfinder, being careful not to bump your camera or anything in this case. Also, before you take your picture, you're going to want to have a shutter release of some sort or go to a standby mode where you can click the shutter and let go, let everything stop moving, and then 10 seconds later, it'll take the picture for you. Those are just a couple things that I forgot to mention, so let's get back to me earlier. So at this point, if I were to take the picture with the settings that I had dialed in, it would come out very underexposed. Reason being is we are now blocking 10 stops of light. So you have a couple options here. The best one is to look at the shutter speed that you currently have it set to and slow that down by 10 stops, and that will give you your exposure. You can also just force the shutter speed down and then just kind of eyeball it after taking a picture and see how that looks. That's obviously the less professional way of doing it, but I mean, if you're in a pinch, you're in a pinch and it works. It's not like we're using film, so we're not wasting a shot doing that, just a little bit of time. So that's been it for today's video. We've just kind of touched briefly on neutral density filters. Like I said, I really want to be doing this out where I can actually take some pictures of moving water and I can kind of show y'all what it can do, but the weather didn't cooperate, so that'll have to be a video for a later date and time. So until next time, happy shooting, have fun, and keep on trying new things.